I spent more time probably on this sermon than I have maybe in any other sermon past. For several reasons. One is context is everything. From the get-go, I want to know who's writing this book, who's writing this letter, this testimony of Jesus. I want to know, who is he writing to? I want to know what this man thought. What was his personality like? What was his audience like? What were the pressures on them? What was their driving forces in life? I want to understand the complex words that we find in verse 1. Because, it's one of three things can happen. You read John 1, verse 1, and you read the first phrase, in the beginning was the Word, and one, either you know what that means. All right, you've done your research, and you understand what John is saying when he says, in the beginning was the Word. Second, you may think you know what it means, and move on with a misinterpretation of what John is saying. Or third, like me for many years, you just don't know what it means, and it seems so foggy, you just move on. And you just say, well, that's not that important. But it was very important because John employs a tactic from the very beginning of this letter. The purpose of John, the Gospel of John, he has one main purpose, and that's to convince you that Jesus was God. And behind that purpose, his hope is that in order for you to believe in Jesus Christ. We see this a little bit in who John was as a person. Look, if you're here today, and I look out and I see, okay, we all know Jesus. All right? Maybe we all don't believe in Jesus. Maybe we all don't believe that Jesus was God. My hope for you today is that if it's today, if it's next week, if it's 20 weeks through the series, that you leave absolutely convinced Jesus Christ was and is God. That there's no doubt in your mind. And maybe as a child of God, you know Jesus is God, but you've got questions. You've got doubts. You're human. I'm human. I hope your faith is strengthened in the truth of who Jesus was. And look, and we're given this story from John. John was a man who was a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. Probably a rough individual. Jesus walks up to him one day and says, hey man, follow me. Something happened in John's mind. He set down his nets. He didn't walk away from his fishing, but he put down his nets and he followed Jesus. John was, from the knowledge that we know that Jesus was God, John got to walk with God, talk with God, probably shed tears with God, was asked by God to take care of his mother, leaned up against God's back while eating dinner one evening, and John is here to say, look, I experienced God face to face. And I want to give you a perspective from my point of view to tell you I met God and he is who he said he is. And if he can take a fisherman like me and change my life, he could take someone like you, an engineer or a mechanic or a stay-at-home mom, a grandma, a grandpa, and change you in a dramatic way to give you life. Who was John? John, we're going to dig down. We're going to try to uncover the gems of the context in order to understand the gospel. And this is something that we've got to do regularly as we go through. John was the son of Zebedee. He had an older brother named James and John. You hear them paired together. When you see that James and John in Scripture, we know James was older because John's name came second. John was a fisherman. He wasn't from a poor family and he wasn't from a rich family. We know this because they had servants that worked with the family fishing company with them. This probably enabled John to set down his nets and follow Jesus for a year or 2 years and then come back to fishing. But James and John worked for the family fishing business, but it wasn't like a free enterprise like today. What they would have to do is they would have to bid for contracts to fish on the Sea of Galilee. And the government would give them these contracts, whoever's bid was the highest. Some interesting facts. On the Sea of Galilee, in the same area, we see Peter and Andrew, two other brothers, another fishing family that are fishing together. James and John, Peter and Andrew, their families were partners together in their contract, in their fishing contract. And Matthew, like I said, this is a lot of information. Jotted down, stored. This is just to give us context. Matthew was a tax collector in that region, right on the Sea of Galilee. Matthew was what was called a booth tax collector. He was the one to take taxes from fishing companies. So James, John, Peter, and Andrew, their families paid taxes to Matthew. Well, see, there was very little to no regulations on those tax collectors. This is why people hated them so much. They represented the Roman government that was suppressing them. Interesting that Jesus calls the tax collector who's taxing these four individuals, and they come together, and they're disciples of Jesus, of God, and they come together, and we have written books, the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of John. And we see that even in a world where there's hatred, and I'm not saying I don't know the dynamics between the relationships before Jesus called Matthew and James and John, but that Jesus Christ can bridge relationships, even in the hardest relationships, in those toughest moments, that Jesus Christ, knowing Jesus, can bring together broken relationships. So that was John, but we know Mark 3 says this about James and John. Mark 3:17 says they were the sons of thunder. Kind of a head scratcher. And as I looked into it, to me this says that James and John had an aggressive personality. And this kind of shows, this pops up in Scripture in two places. If you go to Mark 9, verse 38, we see John's personality come out in a conflict he has with another follower of Jesus. John said to him, John's talking to Jesus, he says, hey, we saw someone casting out demons in your name. We saw some dude, we're walking through whatever, the marketplace, and there's some dude who's using your name to cast out demons. John says, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us. Okay, here's what probably did not take place. John walks up to the individual. Excuse me, sir? Sir, I know you're busy. I know you're working on this demon thing right over here. I'm going to ask you nicely, please, would you not use Jesus' name? I don't think it went down like that. I think when we see this word that John tried to stop, James was probably with him, that they tried to stop the man. Because here, this man is using Jesus' name, who they have given their life for, to cast out demons. And John's like, there's no way that's happening. But interesting. Nancy, put that verse back up real quick. The very last part of that verse, we get a little glimpse into the passion of John. Because John says, I tried to stop him because he was not following us. So to me, or right there, reveals a little bit of who John is. John was passionate about people following Jesus. So passionate that he says, hey, I want to stop this man because I don't know him. I don't know. I mean, he's using Jesus' name, but he's not following. He's not part of our posse. So he's got to go. He can't be doing this until he becomes part of our group. One more verse. We'll go to Luke 9. 51 through 56, we see another incident where John's personality comes out. Why are we talking about John's personality? So we can understand the Gospel of John. Okay? So we can understand why John uses certain words, certain ways, Why does John start off with in the beginning was the Word? So we want to understand who John is a little bit more. Luke 9 says, when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. All right, so Jesus' ministry is coming to an end. He's heading to Jerusalem, but this is what he does. He sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. Who were the Samaritans? The Samaritans, they were this Hellenistic group of Jews. This word Hellenistic is kind of a big word to say. They were influenced by Greek culture. So they were Jews that didn't take the Jewish culture seriously. A few things about the Samaritans to understand what's going on here. In 6 AD, the Samaritans, knowing how important the Passover was to Israel, to the Jews, some of them broke into the temple the morning of the Passover and sprinkled dead bones throughout the temple. That would desecrate the temple, and anybody that walked into the temple and came into contact could not take the Passover. And that really made the Jews mad. If you rewind 160 years, this dude named Antiochus was a ruler, a Roman ruler over the Samaritan province. And what the Samaritans did, they built a temple that replicated the Jewish temple. And this guy tried to bring in the worship of Zeus, a Greek god, into this temple. There was enough Jewish zealots in the area that fought that and prevented that. But there's a Greek influence that has infiltrated the Samaritan villages. And here we are. Jesus says, hey, go into the Samaritan village and have them, have them prepare a place for me. I'm getting ready to go to Jerusalem. So when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the Samaritan people did not receive him. Once again, these people didn't know, I want nothing to do with Jesus, and you guys, get out of here. We don't like you. Because his face was set towards Jerusalem. Verse 54, and when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, we got a great idea here. Do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. James and John, the sons of thunder, because their personality was I want to say aggressive. They were straight up, here's the truth. If you don't like it, let's call fire down and let's get rid of you. So we get a picture of who John is. Just a small picture of who John is. This fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, who a man's man, whatever you want to call him, not afraid to tell you how it is, and not afraid to inject some physical punishment if you did not believe him or accept Jesus. This is the guy who's writing the Gospel of John. And we see that John 21, verse 24, we see internal evidence in the book of John that shows us that this is the disciple who wrote the Gospel of John. Verse 24 of chapter 21. This is this disciple who is bearing witness about these things. That tells me that whoever's writing the Gospel of John is witnessed. Whatever he just wrote take place. That's someone that's very close to Jesus. That's someone that was in an intimate circle with Jesus. And who has written these things, the verse goes on and says, and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. Whoever's helping John edit this book or help maybe co-write this book with John believes what John is saying. Says, hey, I can believe this man because this man's been with Jesus. He's witnessed Jesus. He's heard Jesus talk. And so I'm convinced that the Gospel of John is written by the disciple of John, the son of Zebedee, the one who followed Jesus, the one who's called the beloved disciple. That's just a little bit about John. And guys, I understand. I understand today's information. Okay. Maybe it's a little bit more dry, but just hang in there because I guarantee you the information is going to help aid the interpretation. And, I understand for 1900 years, we didn't have all this information about being able to understand context, and the Bible's been read and people's been converted to Jesus Christ. But in a day and age where information is coming at us so quick, and a lot of that information is false, the more tools we have to understand and back up Scripture, I think the more we should use them, utilize them to our advantage. The audience. Who was the audience? Who was John writing this gospel to? To understand the importance of knowing the audience, let me give you a phrase. I call my mom up and I say, "Mom, I love you." Okay. I call Becca up and I say, "Becca, I love you." Right? Exact same sentence. The meaning of the word love, it goes with both individuals, but there's a different meaning that I'm using with Becca than I'm using with my mom. The audience matters. Whoever's receiving that sentence, that word, is going to interpret it a certain way. And, what I want to do is I want to get into the seat of the one who was designed to read this letter as John's writing it. So the audience, who is the audience? Understand this, John is writing from the country of Ephesus. Probably about 70, 80, 90 AD. 40 years more beyond Jesus' reign here on this earth. 40 years after Jesus has ascended to heaven. John's writing from Ephesus. Ephesus was not a Jewish nation. There were Jews in Ephesus. They were called Hellenistic Jews. A Hellenistic Jew was a Jew that spoke Greek and it was influenced by Greek culture. To give you an illustration of this, if a Mexican was to come to America and he would have children, and those children were influenced by the American culture, they were raised up speaking English. They're still Mexican, but they have American cultures embedded in them. And so this is what we have in Ephesus. There are these Jews that were called Hellenistic Jews because the Jewish culture has been watered down inside of them, and the Greek culture is alive in them. The Greek culture, a little bit about the Greek culture of that time. It was about 400 BC, these Greek gods began popping up, maybe even before then. 12 or 13 main Greek gods. Okay, from those Greek gods branched out over 360 other gods. This is the Greek culture that's in Ephesus, and that penetrated the Samaritan villages. And this is what they worship, these Greek gods. Zeus was one of them. And we saw at around 160 BC, they tried to dedicate the temple to worship Zeus. So these Greek gods were being worshipped in these Greek cultures. In fact, Ephesus had a temple called the Temple of Diana, which was set aside to worship a god called Artemis. Artemis was a blend between a Greek and an Asia Minor god, which was the god of fertility. And so Ephesus, right there in the center of their town, is this temple that is designed to worship a god of life. When they had children, they said, "Thanks be to Artemis." When life was born, it was because of Artemis in their minds. The Greek culture also valued highly knowledge, wisdom, reasoning. And so when John's writing to his audience, these Hellenistic Jews and these Gentiles, and there's a little bit of Jewish thought in his gospel. He's not totally dismissing the Jews, the native Jews or the ethnic Jews. John is writing in a way that is addressing these Greek cultures, these Greek beliefs. And John wastes no time at all going to the jugular in the Greek culture. He doesn't waste a single word when he opens up his gospel. This is, his personality. Here it is, and this is what I believe to be true, and I know it's true because I walked with Jesus. In the beginning was the Word. Notice a couple things about this verse. He brings in 3 earth-shattering statements that he does not pull back any punches. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. 3 earth-shattering statements that honestly I sat and stared at for hours trying to say, what are you saying, John? You see, because my culture, who I am, I can't understand the depth of John's words without understanding the context. I can't understand what John is saying unless I understand who he's writing to and how they use this word that we have in English as word in their time. So I need to dig into a little bit more background. This word in the Greek word is logos. Okay, logos is a translation of a Hebrew word called dabar. All right, and on the surface, we've got the translation right. It does mean word. Dabar means to speak, to utter, to talk, to converse. But in the Old Testament, and why are we tying this to the Old Testament? Because this word logos is a translation of the Hebrew word dabar. We see this in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So we want to understand, what does dabar mean to understand what logos means. You're doing good. Hang in there, because listen, I put myself to sleep 12 times going through this. But just trust me, hang in there. And when we're done unraveling this here in about 10 minutes, I hope, my prayer, and I believe the light bulb's going to go off in your head. Let's get through a little bit more of the wrinkles. Iron them out. All right, dabar. What does dabar mean? Let's go to the Old Testament and let's read some passages that use this word dabar. All right, let's first go to Psalm 33:6. Psalm 33:6 uses this word dabar, which means to speak, to utter, whatnot. Let me read this to you. Psalm 33, verse 6 says, by the word of the Lord, by the dabar of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their host. I had lunch with someone this week, and we were talking about this verse, and she said this, and it's just like, oh yeah, what language did God speak when he created the world? I've never even thought of it from that perspective. English, no. Greek, no. Aramaic, Hebrew, no. I mean, was language even created? So when God spoke the heavens and the earth into creation, what? Was he speaking Pig Latin? Was he speaking a language? Maybe he was uttering something. If a tree falls in the forest and does it make a noise if no one hears it? Does this mean that God actually spoke something? Now, I don't know. I wasn't around. So I'm not here to say yes or no. But I'm here to say, well, there's something deeper here than this idea that God spoke, the heavens shall be created, and they're created. What we see here is that this word dabar shows that God can bring to creation things, that God can bring reality about. It was God's will, his decree, his desire that the heavens and the earth should be created, and they were created. The word of the Lord reveals his desire, his will, his decree. It's so much more than what we get on the top from our English mindset, that he spoke something and something happened. It means that and so much more. It reveals the heart of God. It's like, what is the best way to define this? To me, it is the bar, logos, is the expression of God's heart. Psalm 33:6, we see that by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. The heavens were made. They were the expression of God's heart. And by the breath of his mouth, that's interesting. He's not speaking now, he's just breathing. All their host. Let's go to another use of it. Genesis 15:1. This is used in a little bit different way. God's not creating something. He's talking to a man named Abraham. His name wasn't Abraham at the time. It was Abram. Abram is in a transition phase in life. If you know what it's like to move from one place to another and not know how you're going to pay your bills or what life has in store, you know that nervousness, that fear. Maybe you're getting older in life and you have no kids, but yet you know kids are part of the plan, and you've got no kids. You get a little taste of what Abram's going through. And this is what God says. Genesis 15:1. After these things, the word of the Lord, the bar of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. All right. If Abraham's snoozing under an oak tree, would you have heard God say, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great"? Was that an audible voice? Well, I wasn't there. Don't ask me. But my guess is that this was a voice that was spoken into Abram's heart. But we see that the bar of the Lord can bring peace in the midst of fear. It was God's desire that Abram should not fear, but should rely on him, because God says, "I am your shield." Let's go two more places. Deuteronomy 5, verse 4 through verse 5. Moses is standing probably at the bottom of Mount Sinai. God is speaking through this cloud, and Moses is giving this word to Israel. The Lord spoke with you face to face, verse 4, Deuteronomy 5, at the mountain, out of the midst of the fire. Moses says, "While I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord," the bar. "For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain." Another instance, we see this word debar, where God is giving his decree at Mount Sinai for the nation of Israel, his desire of his heart. One more thing, Psalm 119, 105. You know this, you don't have to turn to it. Your word is a lamp, your debar is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. God says, hey, the words I have spoken and have recorded have so much power in them that they can guide your every step. This is where John is pulling the word logos from. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We're going to talk about this all next week and try to tie it in together. But in the beginning was the expression of God's heart. In the beginning was the manifestation of God's reasoning, his decree, his will. And that was with him since the beginning, before the beginning, and it was him. So we can't unravel this all in 1 week. But now let me turn this into a couple of word pictures. What I want to do is I want to read to you an article I found on a painting called Praying Hands. It's a very famous painting. I don't know the accuracy of this article, but it paints a good picture for us of what John is doing. That's a drawing of the praying hands. It starts off back in the 15th century. In a tiny village near Nuremberg lived a family with 18 children. 18. In order merely to keep food on the table for this mob, the father and head of the household, a goldsmith by profession, worked almost 18 hours a day at his trade and any other paying chore he could find in the neighborhood. Despite their seemingly hopeless condition, two of Albrecht Durer's, the elder's children, had a dream. They both wanted to pursue their talent for art. But they knew full well that their father would never be financially able to send either of them to Nuremberg to study at the academy. After many long discussions at night in their crowded bed, the two boys finally worked out a pact. They would toss a coin. The loser would go down into the nearby mines and with his earnings support his brother while he attended the academy. Then, when that brother who won the toss completed his studies in 4 years, he would support the other brother at the academy, either with sales of his artwork or, if necessary, also by laboring in the mines. They tossed a coin, and on a Sunday morning after church, Albrecht Dürer won the toss and went off to Nuremberg. Albert went down into the dangerous mines and, for the next 4 years, financed his brother, whose work at the academy was almost an immediate sensation. Albrecht's etchings, his woodcuts, and his oils were far better than those of most of his professors. And by the time he graduated, he was beginning to earn considerable fees for his commissioned works. When the young artist returned to his village, the Dürer family held a festive dinner on their lawn to celebrate Albrecht's triumphant homecoming. After a long and memorable meal, punctuated with music and laughter, Albrecht rose from his honored position at the head of the table to drink a toast to his beloved brother for the years of sacrifice that had enabled Albrecht to fulfill his ambition. His closing words were, "And now, Albert, blessed brother of mine, now it is your turn. Now you can go to Nuremberg to pursue your dream, and I will take care of you." All heads turned in eager expectation to the far end of the table where Albert sat, tears streaming down his pale face, shaking his lower head from side to side while he sobbed and repeated over and over, "No, no, no, no." Finally, Albert rose and wiped the tears from his cheeks. He glanced down the long table at the faces he loved, and then, holding his hands close to his right cheek, he said softly, "No, brother, I cannot go to Nuremberg. It is too late for me. Look what 4 years in the mines have done to my hands. The bones in every finger have been smashed at least once, and lately I've been suffering from arthritis so badly in my right hand that I cannot even hold a glass to return your toast, much less make delicate lines on a parchment or canvas with a pen or a brush. No, brother, for me, it is too late." One day, to pay homage to Albert for all that he had sacrificed, Albrecht painstakingly drew his brother's abused hands with palms together and thin fingers stretched skyward. He called his powerful drawing simply hands. But the entire world almost immediately opened their hearts to his great masterpiece and renamed his tribute of love the Praying Hands. That painting is the word of his brother. It is the expression of his brother's heart and his love for his brother that is put on paper. It was his will and his desire to reveal his love, and he did it through the speaking of hand strokes on a parchment or a canvas. When we see this word in John, in the beginning was the Word. Jesus and God the Father weren't just having some casual conversation yapping, and that was what he's talking about. Jesus is the expression of God's heart. Jesus was there before the first tick of any clock. Jesus was with God for eternity past, and the mind-blowing statement that the Greek culture would not have been able to understand is that he was also God. And verse 14 of John chapter 1, and the Word became flesh. Every single one of those Greek gods remained invisible and disconnected from culture. But John says, no, because you got it all wrong. There is a God who has come into this world. And he wasn't born and just like all of a sudden popped up and created. He was God. And on top of that, he was the very expression of God and God's love for you. You see, you read John 1, John doesn't explain to his readers what he's talking about. They get it. They get it. And some of them probably slammed the book shut or rolled the scroll up and tossed it away and said, no, I want nothing to do with this man and his message. And others said, holy cow, I've got it all wrong. I want to read more. I don't want to learn no more about these Greek gods or anything else pressuring me. I want to learn about Jesus. And guys, and that's my hope. That's my hope for us as a church. That's my hope for you. That's repentance. Shutting the book of the old way of life. No more. No more. I want Jesus. Turn into Jesus. Not the old way of life, not the old way of being taught, not the world's way. I'm going to Jesus. And this is where you're at. John 1, verse 1. A lot of information today. We shut the book and say, it's not for me. Or do we say, I want more? I want more. One more word picture to help you understand this opening phrase. The band, you guys can come up. The band was sitting amongst you the entire time. They were there from the beginning of this service. As they walk onto the stage, they are manifested and brought together, and they're the expression of my heart. My desire that music is laid to the final words of my sermon. Jesus. Jesus was the band of God's heart. When those final days came, where Jesus became the expression of God's heart for mankind, he entered into the stage of this world and was the music of God's heart for mankind. And as the days drew near to the end, and as he made that trip to Gethsemane, the music got louder. As the love of God, the expression of God's heart became more clear. Jesus was the strum of the guitar, the beat of the drum that revealed God's desire for you before time ever began. Jesus wasn't an accident. He wasn't a last-minute ditch effort to save mankind. He was God's plan. He was God's plan for you. And John, a rough, rugged fisherman who's not afraid to tell it as it is here to proclaim Jesus is God and hopes. His prayer, his desire was that you, 2,000 years later, could still pick up his gospel and say, I want this in my heart. I want to believe in this. And okay, so we don't fully understand John 1, verse 1. Whatever, we did our best today and we'll do our best next week. I don't know if I care too much. I care more about Jesus entering into our hearts, changing us from death to life.